Thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Catherine. I'm from the Tastings and Events team, if you've not done any of our live events with us before. If you are watching on catch up, thank you for taking the time to watch our recording, and we hope you are enjoying it. And we will be starting very soon, just once we have Samuel connected. As I said, we'll have the opportunity for questions this evening, so please do use the Q&A function, and do also use the chat if you would like to tell us where you are and perhaps what vintage of Mastodoma wines you may be drinking. I know many of you are en primeur fans and fans in general, so I expect there will be quite a few different vintages as we go this evening. So Samuel, thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Bonjour, Catherine. Or should I say bonsoir?
Bonsoir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clear.
All right. Well, you ask where we were. I am in my kitchen. It's 8 o'clock. We finish all the work in the cellar, and I guess it's aperitif time. Quick word about myself. So my name is Samuel Guibert. I am the second generation owner and winemaker at Daumas Gassac, and I've been doing that for, wow, now over 23 years now. Time flies. So 2023 was my 24th vintage, first alongside my father, who was the founder and first winemaker of Daumas Gassac, and then obviously on my own with the team. I thought we'll start, rather than going straight into the wine technique and so on. I thought I'd give a little bit of an overview, or maybe background on how Daumas Gassac started. I don't know if everyone is familiar with the estate, but it's a family estate, about 50 hectares of vineyard. Located in about 10,000 hectares of forest, what we call in the southern France the Garrigue, near Montpellier. So in the south of France. Right now it's still 22 degrees Celsius outside. I don't know what it is in your neck of the wood, but it's still quite nice and warm. Although we would really love to have a bit more rain. Daumas Gassac was historically an old farm. The term Mas on the bottle, you can see MAS, Mas, mean farmhouse in the southern France. So when both my parents, Aimé and Véronique, in 1971 started to look around the area to find a house. Initially, there was no idea of a vineyard, no idea of a winery, just a house to raise a family. I have 4 brothers, so as you can see, we're quite a large family, and 5 boys can be quite raucous, and so it's easier to find something in the countryside rather than the middle of the city. And therefore, they were looking for an old farm or an old house in that countryside north of Montpellier, since my dad's work not in wine but in leather in Millau, in the center kind of France, and they found this old farmhouse called Mas Daumas. This is exactly the family house, the picture you have on screen, and that's still the family house where my mother still lives. My father is no longer with us, but the Mas Daumas, and Daumas takes his name from the family that lived there for about 9 or 10 generations. And what happened in 1972 was, the first meeting was 1971, is my parents heard about this old farmhouse that was maybe trying for sale, and they met with Jean Daumas and his 2 sisters, Elise and I can't remember the third one. The 3 of them were not married, didn't have kids, were close to 80 years old, and we're still working the land like you would you could see in the movie in the 19th century. Technically, no electricity, no running water, everything from the well or from the Gassac River, and everything done by hand. Jean Daumas every day was still taking his horse out to do the plowing and the work. Imagine doing that at 78 years old. I mean, 23, it's hard enough. At 78, I can't imagine it. But as a result, the farm was quite run down. Most of the field had been abandoned, and he could only work the one just surrounding the house. And so they were really trying to sell their house to be able to live in their family house in the village nearby Agnan. And to cut a long story short, my parents fell in love with the place. took their time for the people to move out, to get established in Agnan, and then they settled themselves at the Mas Daumas. And with the farm came some land. And as I mentioned, most of that land had been abandoned for 3, 4, 5, 10 years, not a lot more, but it's been it was quite a large farm by that standard at that time, about 25, 30 hectares of land to be planted, to be used. And so as a result, after renovating the house, they decided to plant to use that land. And it just happened that what my father probably biggest hobby, number one hobby, is I won't say agriculture. We go, I think you say green thumb in English. I mean, basically the guy, when most of us will go and play golf or tennis or I don't know, scuba diving on a weekend, all my memories of my dad was him going out to his vegetable garden or going and planting trees around the property. And so imagine for him when he find not only a house, but a house that comes with some land, where he's finally going to be able to have not a tiny garden, but something that is much larger we can play. And immediately, my father was from a different era, born in 1924, so he experienced the Second World War and the Plan Marshall, and all these ideas that for agriculture to work, it needs to be one big field where you can use tractor all the way around, and rather than having small plots. And so he had this idea that first he was going to plant some grains, wipe out all the forest, plant some grains, and make a big industrial farm in a way. Big, I don't know if we can call it big, but that was his initial idea. And then my mother clearly said, look, if you cut one tree, I'll divorce you. And second of all, if you plant something else and vine or olive tree, you're a fool, because we are in southern France and that's what grows here. One has to remember that in the 70s, the wine from this region were not the most popular. Again, I think you have a term, an English term, maybe not that elegant, that says plonk, and that's kind of the term that was used to describe the wine at that time. But nevertheless, they settled. He actually agreed not to cut any trees and to only recover the small plot that already existed in the middle of the forest. And they called a good friend of theirs, who was the dean of the University of Geography and Geology of Bordeaux, Henri-Ange Albert. So when you're the dean of the #1 University of Geography of the #1 region of the world at the time, typically you know quite a bit about soil and vine. And Henri-Ange Albert came and spent about 5 to 6 days at Daumas Gassac, obviously visiting my parents as a friend. But when they asked him, hey, would you mind having a look around and telling us if we have a good soil to plant, I don't know, maybe carrots, maybe potatoes, maybe olive trees or something else. Fortunately for us today, otherwise I wouldn't be here talking about wine, he came back and said, look, I have found in this valley, you have to look at Mas Daumas Gassac doesn't appear on the map. It's a tiny, tiny valley. It's actually the Gassac Valley. So the Mas, farmhouse, Daumas, name of the family, Gassac, name of the river, the little stream that flows in the middle of that narrow valley. And he walked around the narrow valley and said, I found in this valley a soil that I've never seen anywhere else. But if I had to compare, I would say it looks a bit like Côte d'Or in Burgundy, but it's got a definite characteristic on its own. And then he added, I believe you have a terroir to make a Grand Cru wine. He very quickly added, typically to make such a wine takes 200 years and so much investment, energy-wise and finance-wise. And so, they say sometimes it's easier for people who are not from the industry to take a big risk because they don't realize how risky it is. And that's typically what happened. My dad was obviously very excited with the prospect of being able to combine his hobby with something unique, and decided to launch right away into planting a vineyard with the help of Henri-Ange Albert, of course, but also others, because the soil of Gassac is so different to the rest of the area, because we have a very cold microclimate. Sometimes the difference of temperature is over 10 degrees between the local village and the Gassac Valley, that we had to look for ways to do things differently. And it started by planting Cabernet Sauvignon in a valley where if you look around, 99% is Syrah or Shiraz, Grenache, Mourvèdre, Carignan, and Cinsault. So that was the first risk. You could say at the time, the second risk was to decide to do everything with nature. And that started with my mother saying, no, don't cut any trees, but also going without any chemical or pesticide as early as 1972, at a time where the term bio-organic didn't even exist. It was a time where, actually, quite the contrary, people were advocating using pesticide because it reduced the amount of work and so on and so on and so on. But the Gassac vineyard was firstly planted, you could say born in 1972, with Cabernet Sauvignon only, and the first vintage came out 6 years later in 1978. The white came about 12 years later in 86, and in between there was a sparkling rosé that was made in 82, 83, and that launched into the second part. The first part, you could say, was owes a lot to that great man Henri Jalbert as the godfather of the viticulture, of the vineyard, and again, he really emphasizes how important keeping the forest was. Today we have 77 plots in the middle of about 3,000 hectares of forest. So you have to. Ideally, you'll have to fly over. Exactly. Well, that's a little bit. You can see a little bit of it. Each plot is belted by trees that enable us to combat against disease, to combat against frost, to combat against erosion, to combat against overheat, and so on. And so the second part was really that we owe to another great man, Professor Émile Pénaud. Professor Émile Pénaud, for those who have either read a bit about winemaking, Professor Émile Pénaud was the first worldwide greatest œnologist, based in Bordeaux, not a flying winemaker. He only worked in Bordeaux all his life, from the 40s to the 80s or 90s. He was the advisor of all the great estate of Bordeaux before the Michel Rolland and Robert Parker took over in the early 90s. And Émile Pénaud was, if you made wine from Cabernet Sauvignon, he was probably the mentor to call. And therefore, there's a funny story where my parents for 3 years wrote to him and tried to get in touch with him. But obviously, the guy was in charge of Chateau Latour, Lafite, Palmer, Aubryon. Why going to the Languedoc, let alone replying to those guys? And so they were getting ready to use their first crop in 78, my parents, to take it to the local cave co-op because they didn't know how to make wine. It's one thing to know how to drink wine, it's another how to make wine. And a friend of theirs come by, a friend of my parents come by the property, spend a couple of days with them, and happened to go to Bordeaux the next week. And in Bordeaux, and that's a true story, he told us later, in Bordeaux, he goes to what was called at the time the barber shop, sits at the barber shop, and next to him sits Émile Pénaud, and they know each other. And they start talking, and our friends start to say that he's been traveling, going through Languedoc, and it's a beautiful scenery place, and so on and so on. And when he hear Languedoc, and then Agnan, Émile Pénaud raise on his seat and say, I keep receiving letters from these mad people who want to make a fine wine in this region. And then our friend raise on his seat and say, well, mad people, wouldn't that be the Guibert? Yes, exactly. Tell me more about them. Blah, blah, blah. To cut a long story short, he accepted to welcome my parents to, at the time, Émile Pénaud was definitely a mentor. He would accept people to follow him while he was doing his tour, visiting Latour, Lafite, tasting, taking notes, and so on. And they spent a couple of weeks with him. And at the end, he said, look, that's all I can do for you. Thank you. You're nice people. Goodbye. And they did say, look, take your time and we think about it. And in the end, again, cutting a long story short, but a few months later, just before the harvest, he said, I accept to help you under two conditions. We never talk about money, and you don't ask me to come more than 5 or 6 times, more than 3 times a year, but you can call me at any day of the year after 9 p.m. And until his death in 2003 or 4, I still recall my dad calling Émile Pénaud almost every day during the harvest, and at least once a week during the year, to discuss, but not as you would discuss technically, but more philosophically about wine, obviously technically as well. And this man who was initially a mentor became a friend, and he played a huge part. And the reason I spend a bit of time talking with those two people is that it's important to give tribute to the people who enable Daumas Gassac to be born. I wouldn't be here with my brother if there wasn't my parents, for sure, but also those people who crafted a philosophy of respect of the vintage. We're not making Coca-Cola wine there. We're making a wine that try to accompany the harvest, and you know, when I look back at this year that just ended, we were going through a very easy year. Cold winter, and cold winter is important because it kills all the bugs, so you start the spring with less disease. A wet spring which brings enough rain for the vine to grow until we had rain until July 1st, which is quite good, and then July, August, very mild but hot and dry, and so everything looked fine. So, you know, the harvest was approaching, and suddenly 16th of August we have 5 days at close to 50 degrees Celsius, 47, 48, 47, 48. And that changed the entire vision then we had of the harvest. So when you work with nature, you have to be ready for that. Certainly we were looking at from a vintage that was going to go, we pick everything by hand, as you could see in the picture earlier. 60 people on the estate for a month. We're looking at, you know, picking the rosé, stopping 5 days, picking the white, stopping 3 days, picking the red. In the end, we picked non-stop for 18 days. 18 days working 8 hours a day for the pickers, 10, 12 hours a day in the cellar. It's doable. It's just everything was so compressed that it meant that everything we had prepared for had to be dished out, and we had to start, not to start, but to think differently how we were going to approach this 2020 and 23 vintage. In the end, we have a beautiful vintage, definitely smaller because this intense heat definitely shrank the grapes. It made the water, you know, the berry is made of water, 80% sugar, and a bit of seeds and pulp. When the water goes from 80% to 50%, you lose a lot. You get concentration for sure, so great quality, but definitely less juice. I see there's quite a few questions. I don't know if you are.
I know we've had quite a few comments coming through.
Okay, I haven't read. I just see things popping up.
I think we've got a lot of people with some bottles. We've got lots of vintages being opened. We've got 2016, 2018. We've also had someone open a 1982, which is
right. I have to say something about that. So 1982 was my dad and Professor Emile Penot's favorite vintage. My dad passed away in 2016. Until the end, 82 was his favorite vintage. Mine, I mean, I can't choose between all, but if I had to take one vintage of the Daumas Gassac and Desert Island, I'll probably go for the 88. 82 is stunning. It still has, if it's been well kept, the last time I think we opened one was about, during the harvest, we had a big tasting as well, probably about 12 vintage. We try to taste the wine as regularly as we can, but 82, I think the last time I had tasted before that was 4 years ago. So it's rare. It was absolutely stunning. 2016 is it's a vintage with a high acidity, so great for aging. If you do open it, before 10 or 12 years of age, it's good to open it a bit in advance. One might say, like most Daumas Gassac, sure, but the one with acidity, acidity in a wine is like a backbone in our body. Without a straight backbone, we stand like that. With a good backbone, we stand like that. And a wine that, if you want a wine to stand straight for ages, you need a bit of tannin, sure, but you need acidity. And acidity might be a bit harsh to approach when young, although it gives freshness, but in the long term, it keeps a wine so alive and so fresh. So 16 is a great example of a wine with plenty of acidity.
I think it's interesting. So I've got the 2020 open, and it is still very, very structured, which is, I like a wine with a lot of structure. So for me, it's great. But it was interesting reading on your website how you're suggesting that it's either an ideal to sort of drink it within the first 5 years of its life, or leave it be and then come back to it. Do you still think that's across the board with the vintages?
I think we have to cater in our answer, not in our style, in our answer to everyone.
Yeah.
Younger population, myself included, when I was younger, tend to be more used. I won't say prefer, because our palate evolve. And thank God, I don't know, but I remember when I was 12, I used to eat a bag of lollies. Now you'll give me 4 lollies, that's all I can eat. My palate has evolved, and I'm taking the example of lollies, but it goes with wine as well. I used to love fresher wine, tannin, or sweet wine. Now, if you give me anything less than 10 or 12 years old, I'm kind of sad. Daumas Gassac has definitely at least 2 lives. My father used to speak about 5. I'll keep it to 2. First 3 to 5 years as definitely that more fresh roundness. Definitely the first year is the fruitiest, but right now I'm tasting the 2018, and it's at that stage before it closes a little bit. The one I have in my glass anyway, and then you can expect the closing stage for maybe a year or 2. It's never not that long, but there is a stage where it's definitely a bit tighter. Right now the 15, the 17 tend to be a bit like that, and then it opens up. And whether it is for the white, and I include the white in that, or the red, I love it when it reach 8 or 9 years, and then after that. But after that, I mean, 8 to 16 or 15, sure. Once you pass 20, there are no great wine. There can only be great bottles, and sometimes are absolutely amazing, and sometimes a bit disappointed. Maybe not 20, maybe 25, but there is a point where time does its effect, like it does on us. Some people look great after 50, and some people look a bit more tired. That's part of life, and we work with nature, so we have to accept that. We do all our best. We use the best cork. I was in Portugal in September to visit the cork maker we work with to make sure we get the longest, the best, and so on. We did the same 2 years ago with our barrel. We go and visit them to choose the wood, to select, to work hand in hand. But there is a point where when you've done all that, for whatever reason, you have a 12 bottle case, and 6 are amazing, 2 are okay, and maybe the four others are totally tight, and they will open in 5 years' time. Why? Because wine is alive.
Yeah, it is a very, very natural product, isn't it? It's there's so much you can do, but then you have to let it do its own thing. Once it's made, it's
and even while we make it, there's a lot of, we try to avoid, that the wine takes a bad turn, but we are certainly not forcing it one way. We're really trying to accompany the wine as much as possible in our work in the cellar. And it's easier to say than to do it. But fortunately, I have an amazing team with a cellar master who's been there for 30 years. I've been there for now 3 years. And I have to say, experience is in that field, in many fields, but in that field definitely plays a big part, because before, you see changes, and nature change all the time, and you're certainly all scared, and you run to try to fix it and so on. Now I see change. Either it reminds me of some time where it did something well, and most of the time we know that our term is, we have, il faut se presser de rien faire. We have to rush to do nothing. And in the cellar, we have to rush to do nothing. That means that, okay, we taste once, it's a bit strange. Second taste a day later, third taste. If after 3 tastes it's still going that way, then we need to do something. But we don't just jump because there is one day where maybe it's the north wind. Sometimes when the north wind blows, the wine are totally tight. South wind, open, flowery. It's only experience tells you that. It's rarely in the books.
I think it's interesting. That leads us into a nice question from Sebastian, who's he's saying that Daumas Gassac it's a blend with a high proportion of Cabernet Sauvignon, which is quite unusual for Languedoc. But could you talk a bit about why those varieties particularly were planted, and whether or not you personally would like to experiment with some more local varieties, which also leads into a question for myself. I know that the white particularly has a lot of varieties in, like, making up the 7% of the blend. Is that something you try and stick to in a ratio kind of year on year, or do you let nature take its course and see how it just see how it tastes as you go?
All right, so there's a lot of questions, and you might have to refresh my memory as we go. And especially since I'm a winemaker, I'm drinking aperitif, so I can digress and go in some. But first of all, My father planted Cabernet Sauvignon, agreeing with my mom, because while we have a terroir that looks a bit like Burgundy, we're still and while we have a Gassac Valley that is cooler than the nearby area, we're still in southern France. And the risk with Pinot Noir would have to have an overcooked wine. And time has proven them right. Since the first harvest, there's not a single harvest where the Cabernet Sauvignon hasn't overperform over everything else. We call it the king of the valley. Having said that, they quickly recognize that Cabernet Sauvignon on its own could be either monolithic, some might say boring, some might say too big, too tannin, and they planted a number of other grape varieties. So in that great red from Daumas Gassac, you have about 75% Cabernet Sauvignon. And then you have Cabernet Franc, Malbec, Merlot, Pinot Noir, Nebbiolo, Dolcetto, Tannat, Tempranillo, Petit Verdot, Syrah, Condorny, and a few others I can't pronounce or can't even remember. But, you know, that was the madness of Aimé and Véronique and the genius of Aimé and Véronique. They traveled the world, and mostly Europe, the heart of the world of wine. Wine was born in Georgia or Iran, in the center, kind of Middle East, and then it went over to Europe and then the rest of the world. But when they went to Madeira, they brought back some Cercial. When they went to Switzerland, they brought back some Petit Arvin, and I'm talking about white grape varieties. They brought back some Condorny from Georgia, and so on. The idea was not yet to create a museum of old vine, but to yes, there is some Nero d'Avola as well, a little bit. I can show you when you come to visit Gassac. And it's we have identified each plot is planted with a different grape variety. We have 77 plots, about 50 for the red and the rest for the white. And if you travel around, yeah, I will show you the plot of Merlot, the plot of Nebbiolo, Dolcetto, and so on. What it does to the wine, I'm not sure we can prove it by science, but we can prove it by taste. You know, when you do a dish, great dish of a ratatouille, even, I don't know, curry or whatever, at some point to add complexity, you add spices. Maybe you add a piece of salt and pepper, maybe some thyme, maybe rosemary, maybe sage, maybe cumin, maybe curry, but you add not a lot, just a pinch of, well, the Nebbiolo, the Dolcetto, the Tannat, the Tempranillo, that's our pinch of salt and pepper in the wine. And we know it because when we vinify, we always take the Cabernet Sauvignon aside. We do the rest separately. We see all those little tastes coming together. And once we blend to the Cabernet, the Cabernet that is a bit monolithic, magnificent, but monolithic, becomes something totally different. And to my taste, more interesting, more complex. You know, try to play a symphony with one instrument. Try to play a symphony with 20 or 100 instruments. Try to paint a painting with one color. Try to paint with all the colors. I'm not saying you can't do it with one color or one instrument. I'm saying maybe it's a bit more complex or interesting, definitely for the winemaker, more interesting to play with all these bits. Definitely makes our time a lot more challenging to grow, to prune, to pick, but so much more exciting in the cellar, so much more, and the palate. And a lot of people sometimes think that especially after 10, 12 years, there is a lot more, like they think there's 20, 30% Pinot Noir in the Daumas because the Daumas tend to pinot a little bit. Also, I would say the wine as a shoulder, as a Cabernet or Bordeaux shoulder, but with a Burgundian philosophy into his making.
Are there any great varieties that you think for the future that you might want to plant, or that you wished you already had planted that you could use?
Right now, the Cabernet is proving to be an excellent tool towards facing what we're facing now, global warming, or it's not so much global warming, it's more the amount of dramatical events. Like we used to have frost once every 15 years. We've had it 3 times over the last 5 years. We've had 2 years where the temperature raised to 50 degrees. That's like almost an oven. Those things tend to happen more often than we would like. We're trying some Noluccio, we're trying some cepage from Greece, we're still continuing to try, because that's we don't want to stay asleep, and we like to continue trying. And when you plant a vine, it's at least 6 years before you can harvest it, and probably 10 years before it's really interesting. So we are trying, what we're planting now to trial, we'll see the result in 10 years. So we have to be patient.
And do you think with these sort of more dramatic climatic effects that are happening, is that causing a hindrance with your aims to be with the biodynamic and the kind of more sort of not using pesticides and working a bit more organically? Is that causing problems?
We have two huge advantages. Our land has never seen chemical. Yeah. Even before the Guibert arrived, the Daumas were farming. The only fertilizer came straight from the horse, if you see what I mean. So we inherited from a land that was virgin of any chemical. That's a huge plus, because when you throw chemical in the land, and especially when you do it over time, it takes about 10 years to totally disappear, maybe more. Based on what scientists say. And a lot of people who actually have used chemical in the 70s and 80s are now trying to recreate life, biological life in the soil by planting new indigenous plant that will bring some life. We don't have that problem. The second huge advantage we have is there is a term that is very popular right now, is agroforestry. So the agroforestry, we are surrounded by trees. We have 1 hectare of vineyard for 100 hectares to 150 hectares of forest. We're surrounded by trees. The trees, again this year, I think if I look at this summer, when we had those 5 days of intense heat, I have never ever seen a proof so blatant of the importance of trees. All our vineyards surrounded by trees after that week were still green, luscious. The berries were still quite big. The few vineyards we had on the plain outside the trees protection, the leaves were starting to go brown, were starting to fall. The berries were starting to desiccate. It was like a vision. I'm going to exaggerate. Apocalypse compared to Eden Garden. It was really black, almost that black and white, and that's only down to the trees. The trees evaporate transpiration, and the trees shading protection, shaded and protected the vineyard. And so rather than talking about, trendy terms such as organic, biodynamic, biologic, which we have been for so long, I rather talk about working with nature. And today's more than ever, we know that the dioxide, the carbon, the more we have trees, the more we are going to avoid problem with that. It's the lung of our planet is there. So I can't change the trees of all the planet, but at Daumas Gassac I can tell you that not only we're preserving all our trees, but wherever we can, we plant some more. First, it's beautiful. Second of all, it takes a long time to plant. But when I see all the trees my dad planted in the 70s and they are now 10 meters high, it's, if each generation does its work there, it's worth it. And I'm not coming from a bio or I don't know, a Greenpeace approach, just natural. I wanted to have a beautiful garden, and if that garden proved to me that it's protecting me against hail, frost, drought, why not using it?
And Stuart's commented that he's noted that alcohol levels of many wines in the Languedoc region are sometimes coming up to even like around the 15%. But I imagine in a similar vein, that sort of protection from the forest, from everything else, keeping things at a nice temperate, is that having a beneficial advantage to your wines in that the alcohol level is staying around the 13?
So there again, there are many answers. The first one is the historical answer and the trend. The like of Robert Parker and Michel Rolland, but not only, set a trend in the 90s and that started in the 90s, but developed mostly in the 2000 and years of wine that were what I call over-extracted. Lots of extraction, high alcohol, 14, 14 and a half. We started to see Bordeaux. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, there was a debate between Jancis Robinson and someone else about Chateau Pavis. And she was saying, Chateau Pavis, 14 and a half, what the hell? This was wine that in 1961 held as one of the greatest vintage ever. The average alcohol was 12.5. We've gained two. So there is global warming, but there has also been changes in winemaking technique, which now we're seeing going back to more acidity. For a while, the word acidity was a bad word that no one should say in winemaking or in some region. Now it's going back in favor. The other point is with Cabernet Sauvignon, while they manage to sometimes in Bordeaux to go high, it's more challenging to go to that level than if you have Merlot or some Grenache or Carignan. Our Cabernet Sauvignon, when it gets to 13.5, it's usually we consider it as overripe, and it's really like late. I look at the 2020, it's 13.5 alcohol, and as you know, we need to round up to by 0.5, so it's actually 13.27, but by law we can't write that on the back label. We tend to, between the combination of Cabernet Sauvignon, the blend, the agroforestry, the microclimate, we tend to make wine that focus a lot on finesse, elegance, and balance. And that means alcohol. And I'm not judging. My style is not the high alcohol. That's not my style. But then, I wouldn't be making Daumas Gassac wine if it was my style. My style is more something a bit sharper, a bit more acidity, a bit more freshness. Maybe not as opulent when you open up. I agree with that, but certainly much more age-worthy. And when you give it time, you open it in a big glass or you decant it, it developed beautifully. So alcohol is more than alcohol. I like to talk about balance, and the balance is making sure that the link between acidity, fruit, sugar, or alcohol, and then obviously the use of oak. All of that makes a spherical product, as opposed to if it spikes out, if you have acidity, alcohol, everything spikes in different way. It's not harmonious, and I want something harmonious when I put in my palate.
Absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there is also a lot of a little bit of a trend now where people perhaps are slightly more health conscious than they were before, and they see a higher alcohol percentage, and they don't think of whether it is a balanced wine. They see the number, and that can be a bit scary before actually trying it and seeing that it is a very well integrated, well balanced wine that perhaps maybe just have 2 glasses instead of the bottle if you think that the alcohol is a little bit scary. But I think it's interesting.
I think if we start to read that all the back label, not just on wine, it's scary.
We wouldn't eat anything.
You might as well grow your own vegetables, which we do at Daumas Gassac. Have your own kettle or a neighbor that does, because it applies to all level. When you see some cows that have never seen the light of day and only graze inside, or chicken that never go out. I mean, at all level, there can be some crazy madness, and wine, it can happen in wine as well. I believe in balance, and yes, we have all had that night where we drink more than a couple of glasses, but on average, the idea is to enjoy and enjoy with moderation. I see someone mentioned the 2014. Yes, you're right. The 2018 is actually 13.73, I believe, and there are some warmer year. You go to 2021. That's a lower year where we were closer to 12.5 or 13% than 14. But some year like 2023, the fact that we had so much concentration, I suspect we will see 14% on the red and the white on the label.
Mark's commented that it's a comment and a question. I think that he's saying that the wine is classed as an imp wine, presumably because of the blend used, and whether you make any PDO wines.
Define PDO.
Well, I'm assuming
what is PDO?
Clarify, but I think so perhaps any that are
if we're talking about, I'm not sure if what it means is related to AOP or AOC.
Yes, I think he's meaning any AOC.
So Daumas Gassac was made at a time there was no AOC. today called AOP in the region. Yes, EGP. And so in 1978, there was no option to have an AOC or an AOP, and there was not an option actually to have an EGP, which was before called VDP, Vin de Pays. I'm sorry, it's confusing, but it's confusing for us as well. So don't worry. So today EGP before VDP, today AOP before AOC. So we'll just talk about what of today. But in 78, there was no EGP and there was no AOP. So we were a third one, VDT, vin de table, table wine, for 3 or 4 years. And for those who have, I don't know, on the 82, if it says on the back, on the label, if it says vin de table, or already if it says vin de pays de l'Hérault, vin de France. Yeah, vin de France. Here we go. So there was no vin de pays yet. So I think it's 83 or 84. I would have to check my labels. I was very young. I was 10 years old at the time. And so it's vin de, and no alcohol level. Yeah, at the time we didn't have to disclose anything. It was much better. We could put whatever we wanted in the wine. No one care. Yeah, funny. No, it's funny how the back label have become an artwork. Before you could say whatever you wanted, and no one asked you for anything. But yeah, and then when the AOP Coteaux du Languedoc was created, late 80s, early 90s, they looked at the average, and the average definitely didn't have 70% Cabernet Sauvignon. So 2 options. Either we fitted in their definition of AOP. Their definition was Cabernet Grenache, Mourvèdre, Carignan, Syrah, and maybe 20% Cabernet Sauvignon. Either we had to pull out, to fit in that, we would have to pull out Cabernet Sauvignon and plant other things. But the fame of Daumas Gassac and the quality, I should say first, of quality was already established. Why diminishing the quality just to have a label? And so we decided not to. And later on, when it used to be EGP Pays d'Hérault, then there was a smaller EGP called Cité d'Agnan. There was a recognition that the terroir of Agnan was quite extraordinary. So they made the smallest French EGP ever. And now we are EGP Cité d'Agnan. In the end, there are a few really well-versed connoisseurs that know all the AOP, even the EGP, and then most people who taste the wine say it's good or it's not. It doesn't matter what's on the label, pretty much. We go by the law, so we write what we have to. In the end, what's important is Master Daumas Gassac is a wine that is 100% owned and grown by the Guibert family. We don't buy any fruit. We do everything by hand. And the result is in the bottle, and that's for the consumer to decide whether they like it or not. I don't think whether it is EGP or AOP matters so much.
Excellent.
Well, did you open the 82 a bit earlier? Well, there may be. Yeah, I hope you have another bottle and to wait another 10 or 20 years. I don't know. We can meet up in what's 82 to now. We're 40 years. I don't know. We still have to wait 8 years to get to reach 50 years of time. Man, my God. Well, if we can, one bottle left. Well, let's open it in 8 years. I'll join you if you want.
We've had a question from Sebastian. He's asking whether you can talk about a bit of an insight into the differences of the last 5 vintages as to what sort of you might be expecting. So I'm assuming we're going from 22, and we're not. We can talk about 23 in a minute. We can have a. Yeah.
All right. So 22. So 23 just passed, and I talked a little bit about it. 22, a very, very dry summer. That started on the 30th of May. From June, July, August, we had almost 0 rain. And while it's good not to have too much rain, otherwise it tends to create what people call the bad years, but that's more applied to Bordeaux, Burgundy, or northern region. For us, we do need a little bit of rain. And having known meant that on August 10th, we were really worried, thinking we either have to pick now, but ripeness is at least 20 days away. So we're going to pick something with no flavor. And that's okay if you make a cheap everyday wine, but if you're making a Grand Cru wine with a lot of complexity, it's definitely an issue. Or else we have to wait, but what are we going to harvest? Maybe 1 berry out of 20 will be okay, and the rest we'll have to throw. Fortunately, on August 16, we had close to 100 millimeters of rain. that much, which saved the harvest. Not only saved it, but increased its quality and maintain its quantity, which is extremely rare. Usually wine does one or the other, not both. And in 23 years, that's the first time I've seen that, a rain that impacts so much positively the quality and the quantity. As a result, we have an extremely well-balanced vintage. Acidity is superb. The alcohol is around 13.4, 13.5, as far as I remember. 2021, very, very fresh, low alcohol, high acidity. It was a colder year. One of the year where I haven't talked much about the white when we're mostly focusing on the red, but we have a Daumas Gassac white as well, made from another 20 different grape varieties. Crazy stuff, but we like to do things differently at Daumas Gassac. And the 21 is one of the driest. There's always been a bit of residual sugar in the white, just to lengthen the palate, to make it more complex. And in the 21, it's one of the lowest alcohol ever, or lowest alcohol, yes, but also sugar level, residual sugar level. 2020, similar to 22, a warm year, but with good rain fall in August, and therefore that when we have that rainfall, it seems to set the perfect condition for September. No rush. It tend to be the year where we finish the harvest late, almost beginning of October, while starting at the end of August or beginning of September. 19, a big year, very concentrated. I would call that a monument, one of those vintage quite tight right now with a lot of tannin, but really a vintage for very long aging for sure. And I don't remember so well the weather condition on that year. And the 18 we're tasting right now.
Mm-hmm.
The 18 is starting to definitely get into its closing stage. I mean, I opened my bottle, I double decanted it, pour it out and pour it back in the bottle, so that helps. I did that 2 hours ago. That definitely helped, but it's still getting into that closing stage.
Would you recommend decanting your whites as well?
I always do, unless it's if it's current vintage right now, 22, 21, I might not, but as soon as it hits 3 or 4 years of age, I do, because I like a decanter, but also because sometimes I serve it in a magnum, and I love pouring out of a magnum. I double decant a lot. I learned that the first time. It's a funny story. I was working. Before my time at Daumas Gassac, I lived for 7 years in New Zealand, where I made a bit of wine, but I imported European wine into New Zealand and Australia. And one day I had one of the greatest œnologists coming to visit. His name was Georges Pauly. Georges Pauly was at the time the wine director of Château Gruau-Larose, the second great grove from Saint-Julien. And we're talking about 92, 93. And, I was decanting all the bottle, and he said, no, he had a big rocky accent. No, Samuel, this is how it's done. And he takes a jug of water, he empties it, he takes a bottle, pour it back with, a Saint-Julien. And I was all decanting all softly and gently and say, no, it's good, you did this. And whenever I double decant, I always remember that moment. The wine is made of the people you meet, the moment you spend. You might have an average wine, but a beautiful setting under the stars, and you'll remember it for life. So I always remember that little anecdote back 30 years ago.
That's great. And just keeping on the topic of the whites, because we've not spoke too much about it, but you use oak for your reds. You don't
Yes.
use just mature in stainless steel for the whites. Would you want to do any oak for the whites in the future at all? Would you?
You haven't listened enough. We try everything. We constantly try everything. Amphora, tronconic tank, glass jar, everything we try. It's just for the fun of it. It's nice, and then to see what it does. So the white, actually, until the year 2000, 1/3 of the white used to go for 3 months in new oak that will be then used for the red every year. In 2000, the white wine was so accomplished that my dad turned towards me, and that was my first vintage. He said, Samuel, I think this wine is too good like that. We're going to keep it out of the oak. And I said, Dad, you're sure? You're sure? We've never done it that way. He said, okay, we'll leave 3 barrels and everything else stainless steel. And he was right. 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, the wine in the bottle was so much better, more accomplished outside the barrel. We attribute that to the fact that the vineyard was now by then 30 years of age, so had reached its maturity, and the fruit it was providing us was already a lot more complex. It needed less oak to provide that. Having said that, we regularly, if not every year, almost every second year, put a couple of barrels of white just to check, just to taste, just to make sure that we are not missing something. So far, the white from the tank is more to our liking. Someone who likes that buttery aspect will prefer the oak, but as long as I am the winemaker, I get the end decision, and the team tend to agree. So we no longer keep everything in stainless steel. But we do keep things on the side just to taste.
That must be part of the fun of it, though, really. That little bit of experimentation just to see what will happen. We've had a question from Ian, actually, and he's asking where your other wines, so Faune and the Comte Coquer, where are they produced?
Where are they produced? So Daumas Gassac, one site, family estate, we own everything, we farm everything, we pick everything. Then in 1989, my dad, who was obviously getting bored at Daumas Gassac, not having enough work, decided that he wanted to, I'm going to use a big word, but save some of the viticulture of the nearby Languedoc. And when I say save, it's because at the time there was a dilemma or a question of overproduction, a wine glut in the world, too much wine produced. And the scientists and the professional all pointed the finger to Languedoc, saying, these are the guy who overproduce, and this is where we need to reduce production. And how to reduce production? Well, we're going to put out vine. How do we make sure that people pull out vine? Well, we incentive them. So the European community voted that if you own 1 hectare of vine and you put it out, you will receive 10,000 or 15,000 euros, something like that. Prime d'arrachage. What they didn't foresee is that, let's say you, Catherine, had a vineyard, you had a good job, marketing director at the Great Wine Society, and you had 1 hectare of old vine and you were very busy night and day. Obviously, you were still busy at 8 o'clock at night, and you had an old vine, 50 years old, on the hill, but you couldn't take the tractor. You had to go by hand, do everything, or you had a young vine on the rich plain where you could do the machine and use pesticide and so on. Well, decision for 90% of them was easy: pull out the old vine. And seeing that, my dad thought, okay, there is an opportunity there to do something else, use my Gassac philosophy and experience to bring it, to go and see some of viticultures, say, okay, keep your vine, but let me buy your fruit or use the product of your work, and we are going. I will make a second Moulin. We call it Moulin Gassac. It's not a second wine because it doesn't come from our estate. It comes from 10 or 15 kilometers away. The big difference is always the same people. We've worked since 91 with the same people on the same village, Villeverac for the red and Pinet for the white, same site. And the wine that you're mentioning all come from that estate, that second estate. We have in the pipeline a third estate that we just started the foundation of a new cellar for something that will not be Daumas Gassac, will not be Moulin Gassac, something in between, 100% owned by us. The fruit will be 100% owned by us, probably to make wine with some grape variety more local. And hopefully we'll see that coming in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years.
And just on the other wines that you do produce, so we spoke about the red, we spoke about the white, but the Frisson, the rosé Frisson, that is yours fully as well, isn't it? So that's
the sparkling rosé.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have one red, one white, and one sparkling rosé. Well, the sparkling rosé was initially half a mistake. Well, when you get young vine, as I mentioned, the first 10 years, you get a fruit that can be a bit rough, a bit like a teenager, maybe a bit hard to manage, let's say. And some winery decide to use the young fruit or the fruit from young vineyard for a second wine. Second wine, typically another red or another white. In our case, my parents, again, full tribute to them, decided not to make a second red or a second white, but inspired by a trip to Italy where they had enjoyed some delicious Prosecco, the old style of Prosecco, they decided to make a Prosecco style, method Sharma, one fermentation, no dosage, no liquor, no gas, no sugar, nothing added, just the young fruit handpicked at 11% alcohol. So it's early fruit, a lot of acidity, but low alcohol, fermented in an airtight stainless steel tank where the fermenting gas is trapped and then bottled. And that was the birth of the Master Daumas Gassac sparkling rosé, which is actually a super complicated wine to make. I make it sound easy and fun, but it's so much work. But it's a wine that is part of our history. So we keep and Master Daumas Gassac. Those are the three wines we make every year, and once every 7 or 10 years we make a special cuvée, 100% cuvée Cabernet Sauvignon called Cuvée Mille Pénaux. We also have a late harvest, also made once every 7 years, Vin de Laurence, and so on.
Wow, it's you kept quite busy.
We are busy, but we are four brothers, and in order not to step on each other's toe, we try to keep each other's busy with different projects, and it's good like that. It's we nowadays worked. And again, we do everything directly. We don't use negociation to do from the time the wine is planted, the vine is planted, to the time it's bottled, to the time it's sold. We take care of it. My second hat is export manager. I have a team of 6 people. Who are, all friends of the family, who works because we work in 77 countries or 78 countries around the world with Master Daumas Gassac, but also with the Moulin Gassac. And I tell you what, it's as challenging and exciting to make an amazing red or rosé for $9.99, as the American will say, than it is for $50 or $60, because at $9.99, it's not like you can say, okay, I'm going to have the $1 million cellar and everything. You have to make sure, but we want to make sure that even at $9.99, someone who takes a delicious fruity Moulin Gassac rosé doesn't think, wow, these guys, they make a great top wine, but the rest is shite. Excuse my French. So the idea is to really and it's challenging for us, rather than doing always the same thing. Last week I tasted over, without not just our white, but also the white from other. I tasted over 100 white. There were some maybe 20 Chenin Blanc, 20 Chardonnay, 15 Chenin Blanc, 15 Sauvignon Blanc, 15 Viognier. I wouldn't do that every day. Once a year is plenty enough, but it's interesting, and it's a chance also to meet with others, to talk with the local growers and so on. It's really interesting.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I think we've really had a really great insight. So thank you very much for that. Let me just see if we've got any other questions. Oh, we've got one question that might be a little bit of an interesting one to end on. And it's whether you're feeling the heat of competition from Terrasses de Larzac and Pic Saint Loup at all. We can gloss past it if you would rather.
Actually, I love it. 1989, I go for my first wine fair, private client wine fair in Lyon. C'est le Salon des Caves Particulières de Lyon. We were the only wine from the whole Languedoc. People will walk, they'll see wine from l'Hérault or Languedoc, they'll run away. Some people knew about Daumas Gassac, they'll come, the rest ran away because of the reputation. 20 years, 30 years later, it's our number one in terms of the people who attend the fair for Daumas Gassac, revenue, sales, and so on. We need, the more we are, not just some area, but the better it is. And it's the same for food. It's not because London will have one good restaurant and then make it a food or culinary destination. The day you start to have at all level, and not just a 3 Michelin star, the 2, the 1, the gastropub, great food everywhere, then you think, wow, in London, no longer you hear, wow, you're going to London, or how bad it's going to be. Well, it's the same for wine. When in Languedoc, there used to be for 20 years only us. Sure, you might look at it, oh, it was easy, you were the only one. No, it was hard, we were the only one. And we had to open the doors for everyone. But my parents did it. I love the fact that we are surrounded by great. The Terrasse de Larzac will be more our connection, and actually they're trying to get us to for our new vineyard, our new estate. They're trying to get us into Terrasse de Larzac appellation. We'll see if that happens. But no, honestly, it's great to have growing numbers of fine wines. And Daumas Gassac is the best wine for the person who decides it's the best wine. If you prefer something else from down the corner, it's the same for food. If you don't like carrots, I'm not going to make you say carrots is the best food in the world. So I'm just happy that there is enough people who enjoy our wine, but also not just the wine. What we try to convey. I see someone who mentioned they met my father. Yes, they both are for my mother still extremely enthusiastic people, huge character. So hopefully we inherited from a bit of that enthusiasm and character, and definitely we continue to carry the Gassac torch. So thank you very much for welcoming me. I hope you all had a great time. And one thing also my parents did right from day one, when we talk about agroforestry being popular, agrotourism also. They, from 1978, from the day the first bottle was made, Daumas Gassac doors were open to the public, although the public was very scarce. But at the time, were open to the public with no appointment, no fee. Today, 40 years later, we still welcome people every day of the week, apart from Sunday and public holiday. And we have people dedicated to that, people who are going to answer questions. It's not a group, it's not a bus tour. We really try to share our philosophy, our passion as well at all levels. So I can only invite you to come and visit us. I might not be there to see you or welcome you, and I apologize in advance, but someone from the Gassac family will be there to look after you and to welcome you. And actually, if you do come during the harvest, it's the best time, not only because it gives us free handwork for sure, but it also, you get a nice, beautiful time where you see the vineyard alive, 100 people working, the cellar full of aromas. Yeah, that's a team this year. That's the entire team. So coming from 17 different nationalities, some people who were students, some people who were professional. We have a professional photographer from Poland. He's on his 6 or 7 years. I mean, it's an amazing time. It's a busy time for us, but the best time to come and visit. Merci. Bonne soirée.
Thank you so much. No, members, I've put the link in the chat, so definitely have a look and book your next wine trip. Thank you so much, Samuel, and have a